Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. The love and blessings of the Mother and Shri Aurobindo to all of you from Shri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. Now we turn to today's topic, which is consciousness-based medicine. Consciousness is a word that is very common and yet something mysterious, something that baffles all of us. Uh, but reducing it to its simplest terms, consciousness basically has two aspects: the ability to know and the ability to do. The ability to do on the basis of that knowledge. And that's how what we do becomes meaningful, it becomes goal directed. And it is the combination of these that constitutes consciousness. And this capacity to know and to do is something that we can easily relate to. But then there can be a wide range of abilities to know and to do. And that's how we get a wide range of consciousness. And another thing that is important, I think, in context of today's session and to bring out is that we are talking about the ability to think and the ability to do. We immediately link it to the mind, the ordinary human mind with which we are very familiar. That is what we link it to, and we feel that unless there is that mind, we are we cannot be conscious. But then that is only an assumption. That is only an impression, which is not really necessarily true, because the ability to know need not be the way our mind knows, and the ability to do need not be the type of actions that we are familiar with as human beings in the outer world when we are looking at things from the surface. That is not all, because there is a way of knowing the mind, and there can be actions which can be just as intelligent without the entity possessing the type of intelligence that we think is truly intelligence. For example, if you look at the human body, which medical students try to study in considerable detail, what one finds is that there's a lot going on at the level of the cells and the molecules that constitute those cells, which reflects the ability to know and the ability to do. But we don't think of the molecules as something that can know and do anything. Molecules are matter, and matter uh, is something which we feel knows nothing and can do nothing, and we feel that that is what the molecules would also do. And therefore, when a medical student studies that uh, things happen at the level of the molecules in a certain sequence, the student is mainly concerned with the sequence. For example, if there's a cut in the skin somewhere, then immediately go into play a large set of phenomena or reactions or processes which try to check the bleeding. And the student is taught that this is what happens first, and this next, and this next, and this next. So there's a whole sequence of events, a chain that is built up, and in that chain participate a large number of molecules, and the sequence is truly sort of ingenious. But at the same time, the student at that stage is so busy trying to remember the sequence that he doesn't bother what tells those molecules what to do when and what should happen next. Uh, which means that the person is not really thinking of what is it that is behind this beautifully orchestrated sequence of events. Now, for the molecules to be able to achieve that sort of a sequence is itself something which is extremely intelligent, although we don't look upon intelligence that way. What is it that makes these molecules intelligent? What makes these molecules intelligent is the pranic force or the life force with which these molecules are charged because they happen to be there in a living environment. And therefore, unlike matter, which seems to know nothing and to do nothing, these molecules also, they are also matter. They behave in a way as if they have consciousness. They know what has happened. They know that there's a cut, and therefore they have to go into action. And then they know what that action should be. They are able to execute that action. Whatever those molecules can do, they do it. But then they also communicate the message to other molecules which have to come into the picture next. And that's how the sequence takes place. So The poor medical student is already so burdened with those long sequences. And the more medical research progresses, the more the burden of the medical student increases. So, reeling under that pressure, the student neither has the inclination nor perhaps the time to think in terms of what is it that is behind that well orchestrated sequence of events, and that also is a type of intelligence, and that these molecules are behaving in an extremely intelligent manner, although they neither have intelligence of the type that we think is intelligence, nor they seem to have a mind of the type we think has that intelligence. So without any mind, without any so-called intelligence, still the molecules are behaving very intelligently. And these molecules apparently seem to know what has happened and also know what should happen next, and are capable of doing it either themselves or passing on a message to another set of molecules. And all this is being done by molecules at a level which is extremely minute. Molecules can't be seen with the naked eye. And at that level, there is a certain sort of a uh, marvel that is happening. And the only thing we know why that happens that way is because of the type of language that these molecules have in terms of electrical charges and the shape that they have. So the shapes, of molecules fit into each other like a lock and key, and then positive molecules. I mean, molecules which have a positive charge will be attracted by those which have a negative charge and will be repelled by those which have a like charge. Now, that is the type of things that, to some extent, we understand. But then uh, how is it that that there could be this type of a fit built into these molecules so that even at that minute level they can fit into each other like a lock and key? Isn't that some sort of an intelligence? To have that type of shape in these molecules, doesn't there have to be behind it some sort of a supreme intelligence? And these are the type of things that a medical student doesn't think of, and most of us would not ordinarily think of. But then, if we do not let ourselves be restricted by what is mind and what is intelligence, we would realize that this is also a type of mind, it's also a type of intelligence, and we may not use those words, but at least it is a certain type of consciousness, that is, an ability to know and an ability to do. Now, if we liberate ourselves from that narrow way of looking at the mind and intelligence, knowing and doing, if we liberate ourselves from those restrictions which are in keeping with ordinary everyday experience, then we find that these words acquire a new meaning altogether. And that is what we shall see today uh, in this session on consciousness based medicine. So, with this background, let me now turn to the PowerPoint. Really understand consciousness based medicine. Uh, uh, it's important to sort of understand the spiritual worldview, uh, and that's what we shall start with. But before that, here is a beautiful quote from Dr. Alok Pandey's beautiful book, Veda of the Body. This book, Veda of the Body, is hardly a book, it is an inspired creation. One can make out the words flowing from higher force for which Dr. Pandey has acted as a totally unobstructed channel. And uh, those of you who have the time and want to go into the depths of consciousness based medicine uh, would do well to get a copy of this book and read it, Veda of the Body. What he says in this is that each system of science and of medicine is nothing else but a special way of looking at the same phenomenon. The phenomenon that is what keeps the body healthy, what happens when we are diseased, what makes the body recover health after having been sick. Now, these are phenomena. And every system of medicine is looking at these phenomena. So the phenomenon remains the same, but why these systems of medicine are different is because they are looking at the same thing in a different way. Depends upon the way they are looking at it. The real truth, however, escapes unobserved. No matter how these systems of medicine look at what is happening, look at the phenomena, the real truth remains unobserved. As I was talking a few minutes back, that what is it that is behind all this, and the what is it that we can deduce to what is happening, then we find that the real truth actually escapes the systems of medicine completely unobserved. What they're looking at is what happens, not why it happens, how it happens, and what makes it happen. That is something that escapes. And why that happens is because the real truth is not trapped in the phenomena at all. The phenomena are only an expression. It is a form that higher intelligence has taken in these phenomena. So these phenomena are only giving a shape, a practical shape, a form to something higher, and that is something which remains totally unobserved. Now, in consciousness based medicine, it's important to get into the spiritual worldview. So, what we'll do is start with a very brief overview of the spiritual worldview. And to understand the spiritual worldview, we have to go back in time to the period when nothing uh, as it exists today actually existed. Now, if we look at the individual, we find that there is something which we can relate to on the surface, that is the body and the mind having these two aspects, the emotions and the intellect. But we can also understand that that is what there on the surface, but behind it and beyond it, there is something else which also is a part of the individual, and in fact the most vital part of the individual, because that is what is behind it, that is what makes this surface do what it does, behave the way it does. And what is that? That is our divine essence, the soul. And the fact that the soul exists is something which we may not be aware of all the time, but it makes its presence felt through this psychic being, which puts in a rather faint and shy voice at opportune moments to tell us what is right and wrong, what we should be doing, and what we should not be doing. So that makes it felt. And this voice is distinct from the voice of the ordinary mind, the ordinary feelings, and the intellect, because we find that this can be quite often a voice which deviates from the type of guidance that comes from the emotions and the intellect. This is an entity that is different. It can be in conflict with our surface mind. And uh, at the same time, it is this voice which we find is the most authentic voice. So that is how, by what it does, by the way it speaks to us, the soul makes its presence felt quite frequently. So this is what constitutes the individual. And the spiritual worldview helps us understand this entity, the soul, and its relationship with the surface, that is the body, the emotions, and the intellect. And also, it helps us understand the relationship of the individual with the creator and the rest of the creation. So, that is what we shall get into now, the spiritual worldview, uh, a brief overview of that. And that is important to be able to get into consciousness based medicine. So, if there is a soul, the question arises, how did the soul get in? Is it in the head or is it in the heart? And to understand that, we have to go back in time. We have to go back in time to the period when nothing as we see it existed, which means that there was no material universe. If there was no material universe, was something there? Yes, something was still there, something which is everlasting and imperishable, which has always been there and will always be there. That was there, but all the same, the material universe did not exist, which means that that entity, which has always been there and will always be there, existed in a non material form. Another attribute that this entity had, which was there even when nothing else was there, another attribute of this entity is that it knew everything and could do everything. Now, knowing and doing are what is consciousness, which means that this entity had a consciousness, or it was the consciousness, because that is all that was when what we see did not exist. When nothing else existed, that existed, and that existed, that which existed, knew everything, could do everything. It was the supreme consciousness. Now, one day, this supreme consciousness decided to make itself visible, to make itself visible in the form of material or matter. And since it could do everything, it manifested as material. It became visible as material. However, that didn't exhaust it because what has always existed is infinite. What it manifested was finite. It was vast. It was the material universe, vast but still finite and measurable. And if we take anything finite and measurable out of the infinity, the remainder is still infinity. So the infinite was not exhausted by manifesting in material form. Now, what is it that it manifested as material? What it means is that since it did not have any other material to express itself as the material universe, it itself became the material required for the universe. It was capable of doing everything, so it became that material. And since it became that material, it existed in everything that it became visible as, in every form that it manifested. To understand this in simple terms, suppose a child starts with a square piece of paper, folds it, and makes a boat out of it. Now, if we ask the child, uh, does the boat have the paper? He will laugh, he says, ridiculous. The paper itself has become the boat. The boat is nothing but the paper in another form, and therefore every bit of the boat has the paper. Now, in the same way, the creator became the creation, the creator became the material of which the material universe was made, and therefore it follows as a corollary that every bit of the material universe had the creator. However, the creator was not visible. What was visible was the material, the stone, the mountain, the tree. It was what was visible was the material, not uh, the creator, which was in every bit of this creation. That was not visible. So, if something is vital and fundamental, but is not easily seen, we call it the spirit. For example, when we say that the spirit of the painter is there in her painting, what we mean is, although we see only a painting, a landscape, or a portrait, the painting has somewhere hidden the personality of the painter. Some bit of the painter has got into her painting, and what has got into the painting is her spirit. So the spirit of the painter is there in her painting. In the same way, although the creation has the creator throughout, the creator has an all pervasive presence in its creation, we don't see it easily. So we say that it exists in the creation in the form of the spirit. So the spirit of the creator is there throughout the creation. So the material universe has an all pervasive presence of the creator, the divine, and that presence is what we call the spirit. And this way of looking at the material universe is the spiritual worldview because it acknowledges the presence of the all pervasive spirit of the divine, the spirit of the creator throughout the creation. Now, when it expressed itself in a material form, this what happened to the supreme consciousness? It could not have disappeared. It was within the creation, but at the same time, to start with, at least on earth, the creation was in the form of matter. And although it is an expression, it is a manifestation of the supreme consciousness which knew everything and could do everything. The way it became visible, say, as a stone, was such that the stone seemed to apparently know nothing and could do nothing. But all the same, this consciousness could not have disappeared, which means in some sort of a hidden form, it was still there in the stone. And then we started the process of evolution. This hidden consciousness in the stone or matter started expressing itself bit by bit. And the first leap of in which this was expressed, the supreme consciousness was expressed, was those forms of matter which also had life. So the life force appeared, the prana appeared, and when that appeared, then there was there were forms which had all the characteristics of life. They could have an interchange with their environment. They could consume products from the environment and produce waste products, and through this type of reactions, express the phenomena of life. So the consciousness is the capacity to know and the capacity to do. And now these living creatures seem to have some sort of a knowledge and some sort of a capacity to do. Even a single celled organism like an amoeba, in a way, seems to know when it has food nearby or it has some danger nearby. And it has the capacity to do, if it is food, it is able to approach that food. And if it is something which threatens its existence, it knows to move away from it. So, in that sense, it also has a consciousness, a very rudimentary consciousness, nothing compared to the supreme consciousness, which is manifesting through this single celled organism. So, the supreme consciousness is hidden somewhere in this single celled organism, but and it's expressing only a very small fraction of itself. It's manifesting only a small fraction of the capacity to know and the capacity to do, which the Supreme Consciousness has. But at the same time, now we can say that yes, this single celled organism has a consciousness because it seems to know when there is food around or danger around, and it is the capacity to do something, to move towards the food or to move away from anything that is risky or dangerous. Now, in this context, if we look at and ask ourselves questions like, is a stone intelligent? Does the stone have a mind? One would start thinking, well, not intelligent the way we think, doesn't have the type of mind that we call a mind, but it does have something in it. It has something in it which has that potential. It has the potential for having intelligence, it has the potential for having mind, and the potential is there. It has not been expressed. The consciousness of the Supreme, the Creator, that Supreme Consciousness is so effectively hidden in this stone that it does not express it at all, but all the same, it has not disappeared. So, in a way, therefore, if we say, yes, is the stone conscious? We would say, yes, it is conscious, but the consciousness is not being expressed. In other words, in different forms, be it a stone, be it a single celled organism, or be it a human being, we have that supreme consciousness pervading every cell and molecule, but what is actually expressed is much less than the potential. The potential, we may say, eventually is nothing short of the infinite consciousness of the creator, because that is what is hidden somewhere. But the actuality is much less than the potentiality, even in a human being. We are expressing only a small fraction of the supreme consciousness. Now, if we keep this basic thing in mind, that the actuality is much less than the potentiality, we find that the entire way of looking at health and disease changes, because while the human being also expresses only a very small fraction of what is possible, uh, it is possible for a human being to go beyond what is generally expressed to something which approaches, which gets closer to the ultimate potential. So, which means that if we look at that entire spectrum from what is actually expressed to that infinite consciousness, which is the ultimate potential, across this big gap, for a human being, it's possible to take a few steps from what is actual to what is ultimately possible. So one can move from the actuality closer to the potentiality. So while this way of looking at the material universe, the spiritual worldview, gives us a view of reality which is far beyond ordinary experience. Sometimes it even looks imaginary and contrary to ordinary experience, but all the same, We can now understand, at least at a mental level, that the actuality is much less than the potentiality, and it helps us understand that. And let's see what are the implications of this for health and disease. It explains the tremendous capacity for self healing because when the perfect relationship that different molecules of the body have with one another, which is expressed as health, when there is some deviation in it, which we call disease, because of the infinite intelligence that is packed into every molecule of the body, it is possible for that deviation to be corrected. And that is what self healing is about. Because there's nothing impossible for that infinite intelligence. And even if we succeed in expressing a little more of it than what is generally expressed, there is it's possible for these molecules to once again restore the type of relationship that they have in health. So there is possibility of the deviation getting corrected, and that is what we call self healing, because every molecule in the body has that infinite potential packed into it, and a little more of that infinite intelligence, if it is actually expressed, it will it can lead to self healing. And that's how we can look at the human body, which may look like a machine, but it's a unique machine. Unlike machines, if it is damaged, it can repair itself back to normalcy. So, this tremendous capacity for self healing can be looked at in terms of this supreme consciousness, which is packed, which is hidden, which is not actually expressed, but it is possible to express a little more of it than is generally expressed. Now, this explains also the effect of pills and placebos, because what is being done is in these, if it's a pill which is actually active, which has a pharmacological action and does something active in the body, or whether it is a placebo, which is something inert but gives the person a feeling that I've done something about it, I've swallowed a pill. The pill may have only salt or sugar in it, but all the same, the person knows that I have swallowed something. Now, this is a concession to our consciousness, which is rooted in the physical. But actually, what is happening is uh, swallowing something like a pill or a placebo makes the person feel that, yes, something has been done. And that's how the person is able to give a push to the self healing mechanisms of the body, which means this becomes a sort of a nudge, a sort of a stimulus for those self healing mechanisms to come into play, so that the capacity that exists in a hidden form starts getting expressed. Uh, she is one of my granddaughters. Once she had a skin rash. Asked her after a few days, how's the rash? She said, it's gone. How did you recover? I applied some ointment. Now, what one forgets is that the ointment was only something to assist the natural self healing mechanisms. It's not that the ointment did it. Probably the rash would have disappeared even without the ointment. But all the same, maybe the ointment provided some help, and maybe not even that, but it gave the child a feeling something has been done. And therefore, the peace that it brought, the confidence that it brought that I'll now get well, made it possible for those self healing mechanisms to get good conditions to work. When they got the right conditions to work, they worked and the rash was gone. But then, right in childhood, we develop this feeling that when something went wrong, it was restored to normalcy by using some sort of an outside intervention, be it an ointment or be it a pill. And therefore, we forget that actually there are self healing mechanisms in the body. And that's why Sri Aurobindo here has said it should take long for self cure to replace medicine because of the fear, self distrust, and unnatural physical reliance on drugs, which medical science has taught to our minds. We'll pick it up in early childhood. I was not well. I got some medicine from the doctor and I got well. So the medicine made me well. So this creates an unnatural physical reliance on drugs, which medical science has taught to our minds and bodies and made our second nature. It becomes our second nature. It becomes very natural for us to think that way because we have been conditioned to think that way since childhood, that when something goes wrong, we go to a doctor, the doctor prescribes a medicine. When we take the medicine, we are all right. So, by a sort of association, we build up this uh, we arrive at a conclusion that since getting well was associated with taking a drug, we attribute to it a cause effect relationship. The drug was the cause, restoration of health was the effect. And in the process, what we forget is that the pill was only a minor contributor to the process, if at all. What actually made us get better was the self healing mechanisms of the body, which are inbuilt, which are an expression of that infinite intelligence. I'm not trying to say that in no situation will the pill useful. Yes, pills can be useful, but then let's not forget that the pill also is a manifestation of the divine. The pill is also one of the forms that it has taken. The person who discovered the pill, he was also a manifestation of the divine. And it was under certain circumstances that when that person acted as an unobstructed channel for that higher force, that the person got the idea of developing that drug. And in that sense, through a sort of modification of form and a process of passing on from one form to the other, eventually the pill also came to have that infinite intelligence packed into it so that it could interact with other forms of that intelligence within the body, somewhat similar to the way the molecules in the body interact with one another to lead to a chain reaction. This pill becomes a part of that chain and accelerates a certain type of reaction, certain type of a chain, or inhibits certain types of steps in that chain to increase the speed of healing. So, in that sense, one can look upon even that as a part of that larger phenomenon. But at the same time, since behind it was that infinite intelligence, after a lot of steps in between where its power got diminished or expression got diminished, it does not have the same type of efficacy as the molecules within the body, which are more near the original and are expressing that intelligence, even if it's only a part of it, more in an original form than the pill. To understand this better, let me turn to something interesting that Deepak Chopra has said in one of his books, where he says that the best pharmacy actually resides within the body. And say, if we depend upon a painkiller like aspirin, or say even more potent one, say like an opioid, hmm, opium like drug. We have opioids also in the body, and the endorphins. They also have a similar structure. Now, one is a part of the pharmacy of the body, the other is given from outside. The molecule may be the same, but there's a big difference. The difference is because one is isolated, it is in a bottle or a pill or in an injection. And in that sense, that supreme consciousness is expressed to such a minimal degree that looks like dead matter, which can do nothing and knows nothing. But the molecule within the body is part of a bigger system. It's in a living environment, an environment in which the life force is expressing itself. And the life force is one notch higher, but a very big step further than matter on the evolutionary scale. And therefore, when the molecule is a part of that environment and is charged with that life force, now this molecule can act much more intelligently. And the result is that the same molecule within the body is quite different from the molecule which is being given from outside. And therefore, the molecule within the body is released in just the right amount, at just the right place, and stays there to act for just the right duration. it's part of an orchestra. On the other hand, the molecule that we give from outside, because we are introducing it throughout the body, for it to be able to act where it is really required, we need a much larger amount so that it's a little bit will get into the place where it is really required. Unlike the molecule in the body, which is released only at the right place, at the right time. So we're giving a much higher dose. And then it circulates all over the body. It produces the type of effect which is desirable at the place where it is really required. It also produces some effects at places in the body where it is not required. And that is what we call side effects. And therefore, what Deepak Chopra says is that what is released within the body is part of an orchestra, produces sweet music. Whereas what we give from outside is something that shouts at the body with single minded persistence, makes a lot of noise, it shouts. So, the difference between the two, and that is why the molecules within the body act much more intelligently than what is given from outside. And so, what we give from outside should be restricted to the most essential situations. But unfortunately, what happens is in every possible situation, medical science has taught us to rely on these drugs given from outside. Hmm. Now, another thing which the spiritual worldview helps us understand is the body mind continuum. Huh. Now, dead matter got a push in the evolution when it was charged with the life force. Now, creatures which had a life but no mind underwent another major change when the mind was introduced. So, after the life force, the next major leap in evolution was expression in the form of the mind. But all the same, both the body and the mind are an expression of the same supreme consciousness. There are two different forms in which they have been expressed. The forms are different, but the consciousness is the same, which is being expressed in two different ways. Body is a gross manifestation, the mind is a subtle manifestation. But all the same, both are manifestations of the same. And therefore, it is understandable that there is really no discontinuity between them. There's a continuum. And one mode of consciousness can influence another. And this we can easily relate to because if the body is not well, see if there is an injury to the hand, not only the something happens to the hand, the person as a whole feels uncomfortable. The person as a whole may feel pain. The person's mind feels the pain. So there's a body mind continuum. Injury is only in the hand, but not only the hand suffers, the person suffers, the mind has feels that pain. On the other hand, we also find that when the mind is happy, the body remains healthy. When there's mental stress, the person is more likely to fall ill. So there is a continuum between the body and the mind, and this can be easily understood uh, in terms of the both body and the mind being just two different expressions of the same supreme consciousness, the body being a gross manifestation and the mind being a subtle manifestation. There is essentially no discontinuity between the two, and that's how we can understand the body mind continuum, and that explains the mind body relationship, which forms the basis of mind body medicine, which has come back with a vengeance during the last uh, 50 years. Uh, After having gone through an eclipse for 50 to 100 years before that, that we have seen several times, spectacular achievements of physical medicine like antibiotics and the discovery of vitamins and the discovery of safe anesthesia and the imaging techniques uh, gave us some spectacular advances in the field of medicine. And the result was that the mind body relationship was forgotten because it didn't seem to be necessary. For example, if the person's blood sugar is high, you give the person insulin, the blood sugar comes down promptly. If a person has typhoid, you give the right antibiotic, typhoid, which through the self healing mechanisms may take a month to heal, becomes all right within a week. with the right antibiotic. And for these effects to happen, the person doesn't have to use the powers of the mind. The drug seems to act directly on the body, and the the person gets well. So that's how the mind body relationship was forgotten. But then there came another set of diseases, the lifestyle diseases, which are what we are focusing on in this course. These lifestyle diseases, which were a different category of disease, a different type of uh, disease. And in these diseases, what we found was that the mind body relationship was important. Stress was a major contributor to these diseases. And fortunately, it's a two-way street. Not only stress increases the risk for these diseases, when we are relaxed, when we are at peace, there is also a possibility of recovering from these diseases. These diseases can be prevented, and if they have not been prevented, if we have not been able to prevent them by being cheerful, relaxed, having mental peace, we can recover much better and much faster from these diseases. To some extent, we can even reverse them. So all this can be understood easily in terms of the spiritual worldview because there is essentially no discontinuity between the body and the mind. They are just two different expressions of the same supreme consciousness. Another important thing that the spiritual worldview helps us understand is the continuum between the individual and the universal. An individual is not an island unto himself. An individual is an expression of the supreme consciousness and has in every cell and molecule the spirit of the creator, which is all pervasive. In the individual, we don't call it the spirit, we call it the soul. The soul and the spirit are essentially the same thing. The only difference is that the spirit is universal, whereas the soul is individual. But all the same, there is no real qualitative difference between the soul and the spirit, which means that the individual is continuous with everything else around the individual. So one individual is a manifestation of the supreme consciousness, expressing a certain limited amount of that supreme consciousness. Another individual is also the same. Another individual is also uh, expression of the same supreme consciousness, expressing a small fraction of it. And the supreme consciousness that pervades every cell and molecule of one individual also pervades every cell and molecule of another individual. What about the air gap between the two? That air is also a manifestation of the same supreme consciousness. It is manifesting as matter, it is manifesting as gases like oxygen and nitrogen. They are also a manifestation of the same. They also have the same spirit hidden in them. So, oxygen and nitrogen also have the same spirit. So, when it comes to that all pervasive universal spirit of the creator, there's real no breach of continuity between one individual and another. So, the border or the boundary or the outline of the individual as defined by the skin is only a partial reality. It's only a partial reality. At a certain level, yes, it is true. But if we look deeper into the all pervasive presence of the spirit of the creator, there's a continuity between one individual and another, and also continuity between the individual and the air gap that separates one individual from another. And that is what explains the effect of the healer's mind on the patient's body, which means that if the healer has sincere healing intentions for the patient, the healer sincerely wants the patient to get better, the patient does get better faster. So, not only the patient's mind can affect the patient's body, the healer's mind can also affect the patient's body. And this is what explains that mysterious phenomenon that certain doctors get very popular, irrespective of the treatment that they are given. The treatment given by two doctors may be the same, but one doctor gets popular because every patient invariably gets better much faster. So the reputation spreads. Anyone who goes to this doctor recovers very fast. Now, it's not necessarily that the treatment given by this doctor is different, but this doctor is full of those sincere intentions for the patient. He wants to help the patient, he wants to serve the patient, he's seeing the divine in the patient. And that's how the patient recovers much faster. In fact, in Ayurveda, there are different sort of categories of doctors also defined, that who are the doctors who will just give the treatment and will not be so effective. And the other extreme are doctors who are themselves uh, on the spiritual path and might be even self realized souls. That is, they can see the divine in everything. Uh, they can see themselves as a manifestation of the divine. They can see the patient also as a manifestation of the divine. And this type of a healer will be much more effective because he can pass on these uh, subtle vibrations to the patient, and that is what actually heals the patient, because there's no discontinuity. This transmission from the healer to the patient is something that is happening not through a medium, not through the physical medium of the pill. The pill is only a concession, although he can charge that pill with that same force so that the pill becomes more effective, because again, there's no breach of continuity between the healer, the healer's fingers, and the pill that he's holding. And then as it is being passed on through the air to the patient's hands, there's no real breach of this continuity. It's all continuous. There's no discontinuity. And therefore, in that sense, the pill gets charged if it is traveling with that intention from the healer. The hidden consciousness in the pill also has that uh, consciousness hidden in it, that gets charged, and that's how that becomes uh, effective. And the patient is able to understand that better, because it's a concession to the physical consciousness in which we are primarily rooted. And the result is that now when this patient takes this pill, uh, he has greater confidence in it. So it came from the healer's mind to the pill, from the pill to the patient's body, and from the patient's uh, sorry, the came from the healer's mind to the pill, and then from the pill to the patient's hands, from the patient's hands to the patient's mind, and from the patient's mind to the patient's body. So that is what is how the pill is getting charged. So the pill becomes more effective. But the pill was not absolutely essential, because even between the healer's mind and the patient's body, there's no breach of continuity. The healer's mind is a subtle expression of the same supreme consciousness. The patient's body is also a gross manifestation of the same, and the air gap between the two is also a manifestation of the same consciousness. And therefore, if say the A is the healer and B is the patient, these little dots are that all pervasive spirit of the divine. So from A to B, there's no real breach of continuity. So even the intentions, healing intentions of A could have been passed on to B, and that also would have made the patient be better. But then the pill becomes a concession to the physical consciousness in which we are very heavily rooted, which means that uh, we can understand through this how the healer's mind can affect the patient's body. And at least this is one of the plausible explanations which we have available for this phenomenon, which is widely known, because some doctors do build up a better reputation just because of these sincere healing intentions. And as it's said sometimes in the vernacular, us doctor ke haath mein shafa hai. He seems to have something unique in his hands, some special blessing he seems to have, which makes the patient get much better, much faster. So this is what explains the effects of prayer also on healing, as we saw in the previous session. It can explain the effects of healing intentions of the doctor, or for that matter, any well-wisher. And the transmission of this, since it is, transmission is through consciousness, not through a physical medium, this transmission is instantaneous, which means does not really require time. It doesn't have to travel like, say, light or sound, which has a finite speed. The consciousness does not have a well defined speed like that. The transmission is instantaneous. It is not only instantaneous, it is unmitigated, which means it does not reduce in its efficacy with distance. The healer could be just uh, sitting opposite the patient, or the healer could be in New Delhi and the patient could be in New York. So the transmission is unmediated, that it is not mediated by any physical medium. It is unmitigated, which means it does not reduce in its efficacy with uh, distance. So this individual universal continuum explains the effect of the healer's mind on the patient's body and the efficacy of prayer, and also explains the efficacy of what are generally called energy medicine systems. Now, the word use of the word energy here is a concession to the era of science. Because energy is something which science understands much better than consciousness. Now, what is being passed on is actually uh, something which is sort of uh, being transmitted through the consciousness. And, uh, and therefore, it is actually consciousness which is consciousness which has a force. Force means a power to do something, and that something is being done. So, what is being passed on is a subtle energy or consciousness, or the power or the force aspect of that consciousness, or what are sometimes called these days vibrations. It is the positive vibrations that are being passed. But the word energy seems to suit well in the era of science, although it is not the best term. It's to some extent a misnomer, because energy is something blind. Energy is a manifestation of the divine, whether be it heat energy or sound or any other type of energy. That is also a manifestation of the divine. But the supreme consciousness is expressed in these different forms of energies to such a little extent. It is so rudimentary and dormant that it acts in a blind manner. For example, when it comes to heat energy, it will heat anything which happens to be near it. It does not discriminate. It is not a goal directed application of the force that this energy possesses. So it is blind. But when it is uh, expressed better, and that is what happens in this situation, when that consciousness is expressed a little better, it becomes more purposeful, it becomes goal directed. So that goal directed application of energy becomes a power. It is no longer just energy. So it's a force which is conscious. It is it has a certain will behind it. Uh, it does what it wills or wishes to do. It is not a blind force like heat, which will just warm up anything that happens to be near it. But all the same, these are called different energy medicine systems. Now, what are these energy medicine systems? Energy medicine systems are those in which, in some way, the healer's intentions are helping the patient recover better. Now, these could be of different types. They could be hands on or hands off type, which means the healer may actually touch the patient or may not touch the patient. And if it is being done across a long distance, naturally, the touch is not possible. But then again, because of our being primarily rooted in the physical consciousness, if that touch is possible, then probably it can be a little more effective because the patient is more convinced that yes, something useful has been done. I have been touched by this person who is a healer. So that is what is behind the therapeutic touch. But then, strictly speaking, in terms of the transmission through the unified field of consciousness, that touch is not absolutely essential. So we could have hands-off type of methods also, like in pranic healing, where the healer is sitting near the patient, but actually does not touch the patient. Or it could be like reiki, where the healer may be sitting near the patient, or the healer could be sitting far away from the patient and just sending this energy or vibrations across long distances to the patient. But essentially, the phenomenon remains the same. The process remains the same. So, this is what explains these different forms of energy medicine, like therapeutic touch, pranic healing, Reiki, etc. In one way, you can see, therefore, that whether it is administering of a pill by an allopath, or whether it is sending packets of energy by a Reiki master across long distances, or whether it is the healing intentions or prayers sent by a healer or by a well wisher across long distances, all types of healing that takes place is consciousness based. What prevents this consciousness based approach from having its full effect is that we do not trust it. We do not have faith in this method the way we have in physical modes of treatment like a pill or surgery. The doubts that we have whether it can really work because it is so contrary to our ordinary everyday experience. All methods of healing take time. We do not have the patience to wait. And then we insist on a specific outcome. While the approach works, the more we rely upon the consciousness of the Supreme manifesting itself in the patient, more the outcome also uh, we have to understand depends upon the same Supreme Consciousness. So we insist on a certain specific outcome, and that may not be necessarily the best, and that may not therefore always happen. For example, if a person is has an incurable illness and is going through a lot of misery, is suffering, and all what different modalities of treatment can do is to prolong this miserable life, then the outcome, the best outcome, even according to human logic, would probably be to be relieved of this misery rather than prolong the suffering. When it comes to the inscrutable logic of the divine, there may be other reasons why this person should continue to live or should not continue to live. There could be some subtle reasons at that level, at the level of the logic of the divine, logic of the infinite, why even this person should continue to live for some more time. If this person, which means that uh, if it is possible for this soul to evolve further, even while going through this suffering, then the best outcome may be to prolong life. But all the same, the divine knows best what is best for that person and what is best for the world in general, for the consciousness of the world in general. So the divine knows best. And therefore, the outcome may be what we want. The outcome may turn out to be different from what we want. And then what prevents this effect of the consciousness based approach to be fully effective is also applying mental yardsticks to a phenomenon that works at a level higher than the mind. At the level of the mind, we start thinking, is this a rational approach? Is it an approach that has been scientifically tested? Is it an approach that can be tested through a randomized control trial? Is it really possible? Now we start thinking, start applying mental yardsticks to a phenomenon that works at a level higher than the mind. Because when we are talking of that supreme consciousness, the mind is only one mode of manifestation which expresses only a small fraction. We are tapping a higher fraction which goes higher than the mind, and therefore mental yardsticks don't apply. Something which is at a lower level is incapable of judging that is working from a level higher than itself. And therefore, the mind cannot judge this phenomenon. As the mother has said, the mind is a very poor instrument for judging uh, matters at the spiritual level. That is because the spirit is at a level much higher than the mind. The mind is only expressing only a small fraction of what that spirit is capable of manifesting as. And then finally, we have divine grace available to us. By using too much of a mental approach, we become unreceptive to grace. We block the grace. We do not let that grace have its full effect. We don't let it function. Because, as in any signal which is received, say, by a smartphone or by a television or whatever it is, uh, the signal may be there, but unless the instrument also has a proper receptivity, unless it's capable of receiving the signal, it will not be able to function. So the capacity to receive that signal, the better that capacity is, the better that signal will be received. So here also the divine grace is around us all the time. It's available to us all the time, but we become unreceptive to it if we block it with our doubts and questions and start applying. When we start applying, mental yardsticks to a phenomenon that works at a level much higher than the mind. So, any barrier between the surface, our ordinary body and mind, are the surface consciousness. Now, the difference between this consciousness and the supreme consciousness is sometimes expressed in writing in a very subtle manner. The surface consciousness we spell, and the consciousness in surface consciousness we spell with a small c, whereas the supreme consciousness we spell with a capital C. The source, the source of that supreme consciousness, therefore, is also with a capital S. Any barrier between the surface and the source diminishes us. It diminishes our capacities. Our actuality remains far away from the potential. Any dissolution of this barrier, any weakening of this barrier takes the surface towards its potentiality, towards the potentiality of the source itself. So, therefore, what we need to do is to connect the soul and the universal consciousness. Our individual soul is the individual manifestation of this supreme consciousness. We connect it to the universal consciousness that is the spirit of the creator at all levels. At the physical level, because the body is also a manifestation of the same. At the emotional level or the vital, because that's also a manifestation of the supreme. The emotional part and the vital or the life force, they're all closely linked, and the intellect. So, all these different parts of the being can be connected to the soul much better than they ordinarily are. Soul is the anchor to which they can be tied. Soul is the anchor in light of which they can work. And when we try to achieve that unification of the being, in which the surface gets closer to the universal's consciousness, when that barrier between the individual and the universal is weakened and eventually demolished, we find that this unification of all parts of the surface, that is the body, the emotional part of being and the intellect, when this gets united with the soul, and union with the soul takes it closer to the union with the, or being in communication with the universal consciousness, we find that the uh, universal consciousness is able to work on the individual much better. This is essentially what yoga is about. Yoga is union. Union of what with what? Union of the surface, that is the physical, vital, and the mental, or the physical, the emotional part of the being, and the intellect, with what is behind it, and that is the soul. Now, that is the unification of the individual. Unification within the individual surface getting connected to its. When this connection or unification of the surface of the individual with the soul has been achieved, the surface will be able to act more and more in light of the divine essence. The, div- the possibilities of the divine essence to act are much greater and better than of the limited manifestation which the surface ordinarily has. So, this unification or this anchoring of the body and the mind, particularly the mind, to the soul, improves the actual expression of the surface. But then, further, if this is also united with the universal, that is, the barrier between the individual and the universal is demolished, then this unification is carried one step further. Not only there is unification within the individual is now united with the surrounding creation, with the rest of the creation. When that happens, then there is a further improvement in the expression of the surface of the individual, the body and the mind of the individual. Now, uh, further improvement in this, how is it expressed in medicine? By the healer's mind affecting the patient's body and to some extent also the mind. The patient develops faith, the patient develops trust. So the healer's mind is acting also on the patient's mind. Because all these are different modes of expression of the same supreme consciousness. So connect the soul of the individual with the surface, unification of the individual. Connect the individual with the universal, another level of unification of the individual and the rest of the creation. And you have the actuality approaching the ultimate potentiality. So, if we are able to do this, then we are dependent on the skills of the divine, because it is we are letting the divine work through its different modes of manifestation, the body of the patient, the mind of the patient, the body and mind of the patient, and the mind of the healer, the body and the mind of the patient, the mind of the healer, and the physical concession like a pill that we are using. We are letting all that become different instruments or different channels for expressing the skill of the divine, the skill of the best doctor in the universe, the divine. So that's why Sri Aurobindo says, now we can understand this. Unappalled by the fear of death, canst thou leave to him, not as an experiment, not an experiment. Well, let me try this also, not like that. Or let me see whether it works. So that's a real experiment. I'll test it and then see, does it work? Now, not as an experiment, not just to try. Well, let me try this and also that. Let me try the pill and also uh, trust the divine. Not realizing that the pill can also carry the consciousness of the divine. Unappalled by the fear of death, canst thou leave to him, not as an experiment, with a calm and entire faith, thy ailments. Thou shalt find that in the end, he succeeds the skill of a million doctors. In short, a human being can actually manifest what is normally hidden, and what is hidden is the consciousness of the Supreme, and therefore, sky is the limit to what can happen. And what can therefore happen may not, may be completely outside our normal expectations of possibility, may be completely outside our rationality. So, not only the methods can be completely outside the realm of rationality, the results can also be completely outside the realm of rationality. And that is how we arrive at those miracle cures, so called miracle cures. This person had an incurable disease. Doctors can't understand how he recovered. So anything that violates the limiting laws of a limited consciousness is a miracle. So that's why we call it miracle healing. And actually, there's nothing like a miracle. It's just that it is not following the limiting laws, it is following a higher law, a natural law of nature, a law of the divine. So it is following a much higher law than the type of laws which the ordinary mind can understand. The ordinary mind is a limited expression of the consciousness, and therefore its laws are also limited. Not only they are limited because we place great reliance on the mind, they also become limiting laws. They limit our capacity to accept what is possible, what is not possible. So when something which this limiting, the limiting laws cannot accept as possible, we call it a miracle. Well, somehow it has happened, but we don't know how it happened. It is a miracle. So yoga can do miracles because essentially this unification is yoga. However, conditions apply. And what are those conditions? When then expressed very briefly, expand the consciousness. Instead of remaining limited, expand the consciousness, uh, make it wider, deeper, and higher. Here's Larry Dossey, one of the pioneers in the field of uh, prayer and healing. To be comfortable with miracles, doctors must have a high tolerance for the unpredictable and the irrational. Because our ordinary mind, which defines what can be predicted and what is rational, is not the limit of truth. Truth is much wider than what the mind can conceive. But then he adds, which we disdain. We means we as a community of doctors, we as a human society, we as ordinary human beings, we disdain. We somehow have a, not only do not trust, but have some sort of an aversion, some sort of an aversion to something which is unpredictable and irrational. Unless we give up this aversion to what is unpredictable and irrational and accept that something quite different from what is ordinarily predictable and rational can also happen, that can be a part of a higher truth. Unless we accept that, we will not be comfortable with miracles. And here's the last word from the mother: catch hold of a peace deep within and push it into the cells of the body. With the peace will come back the health. Peace is one of the most profound and unmistakable expressions of that supreme consciousness. And since that is all pervasive, it is there in every cell of the body. So catch hold of that peace deep within and push it into the cells of the body. That is to some extent what visualization is about. You focus your attention on a particular part of the body, which seems to be the major focus of it, the deviation that we call disease. You focus on that, you focus on the peace that resides within, the focus on the divine that is there, and the divine is always at peace because the divine has no desires, it has no anxiety, it has no insecurity, it has no hatred, no jealousy. So catch hold of that peace which is devoid of all these negativities like doubts and questions, negativities which are obstructive, like doubts and questions, negativities which do not let this peace manifest itself, like desires and anxiety and insecurity. So catch hold of that within every cell, because that's the divine is there in every cell in the form of its spirit. Catch hold of it, devoid of all these limitations and obstructions and oppositions. So if you're able to catch hold of that peace deep within every cell of the body, and particularly direct that force at the part of the body which seems to be the focus of the disease. So that's how you can direct this force. So during visualization, you visualize that part of the body, get hold of that peace within the body, and tap it from the universal energy, then direct it through the body to those cells of the body which seem to be diseased. And you find that when you are able to send that peace, which is the most important attribute of that power, the power of the Supreme, you find that back comes the health. Because now the molecules are charged with a force, the life force, which can act properly. The prana is incapable, sorry, the prana is capable of doing an enormous amount of work because it is an expression of infinite intelligence. It may not have the type of mind that we normally associate with the mind. It may not have that type of a mind. It may not appear intelligent, but it has another type of intelligence uh, to kickstart that orchestra of events and reactions in the body, which will lead to self healing, which will assist self healing, which will accelerate self healing. So, catch hold of a peace deep within and push it into the cells of the body, which means meditate uh, so that one can achieve that silence. In silence comes that peace, that connection with the divine. So, achieve that connection and visualize it, concentrate it, send it, direct it to the part of the body which is diseased, and we find that comes back the health. So, this is how one can let this supreme consciousness work more effectively without an obstruction, unhindered action. To learn a little more about the spiritual worldview, of which we had only a very brief overview today, you may go to this book, Understanding Spirituality and Living It 24/7. And this is available as an ebook on Amazon. And if you need a hard copy, you may not easily get it many places, but you can drop an email to us at yes@yesspirituality.com. We have an arrangement by which we can courier it to any part of the world. And on the specifically on today's topic, the best book that I have come across is this one by Dr. Alok Pandey, Veda of the Body. We'll be happy to hear from you. Any questions or comments that you might have, you may send an email to yes@yesspirituality.com. Gratitude to the Mother and Sri Aurobindo for making these sessions possible. And thank you all for being there.
Close with a moment of silence today's session. So thank you, everyone.